title of what I want to talk about this evening is Rising Above Manufactured Trauma. Because this is a game. It really is a game. These guys treat it as a game. But their objective is to keep everybody, of course, in fear, because that's how they control. But once we step beyond the fear, which we can do, of course, by learning the rules of the game, then it takes on a whole different ball game. And I released a presentation, which I actually gave in Liverpool last year, called The New World Order. They're fucked and they know they are. Although that was actually broadcast on Edge Media, and for some reason they shortened the title. And they know that people are starting to see through the veneer. People are starting to say, hang on a goddamn second, something's going on here. And our role, I guess, is to try and help that awareness arise. So something I wanted to show you, really in support of what David has been talking about. Because part of my research into this geopolitical agenda, the deep geopolitical agenda, takes me into the archives of the extreme right-wing, they're all right-wing generally, think tanks. And this is from a document that was published in 1967, but it was a document that was actually put together in the early 60s, about 63. And in this document, it's called the Report from Iron Mountain, it says, nevertheless, an effective political substitute for war would require alternate enemies, some of which might seem equally far-fetched in the context of the current war system. And this report was produced, in the immediate aftermath of the Cuban Missile Crisis. And the group were tasked to find ways of effectively controlling humanity without the need to go to war. So it may be, for instance, that gross pollution of the environment can eventually replace the possibility of mass destruction by nuclear weapons as the principal apparent threat to the survival of the species. Now remember, this was put together in the early 60s, published in 67. Poisoning of the air and of the principal sources of food and water supply is already well advanced. It constitutes a threat that can be dealt with only through social organization and political power. But from present indications, it will be a generation to a generation and a half before environmental pollution, however severe, will be sufficiently menacing on a global scale to offer a possible basis for a solution. I mean, shouldn't that at least give people some cause for concern about the mythology of anthropogenic global warming? Although I do notice that some of the groups that, latch on to the dogma are actually starting to move away from anthropogenic global warming and now starting to talk about a more generic climate change. So watch the evolution of this, because I'm sure that in a few years it's not going to be global warming, but they're going to latch on to the fact that it's global cooling. And as David said, Al Gore, of course, this guy's going to become a multi-billionaire if the carbon trading and the cap and trade system comes into play. That's exactly what this guy's about. And as David rightly identified, of course, the High Court in Kent ruled that this film was effectively just Hollywood trash. And all of this, of course, I started out with the New World Order, and as Frankie said, that I may be one of the few people in this country that actually utters the phrase New World Order marginally more than Gordon Brown. But it's a phrase that Gordon Brown had never mentioned until January of 2007, not that we can find any public record. But since January 2007, when he gave a very haunting speech in India, that phrase has started to just roll off his lips. And of course, in the opening video of the conference, you saw a clip of him making a speech where he used that phrase and variations of that phrase multiple times. But what is the New World Order? What are their objectives? Well, it's very deep, but to summarize, their objectives are a one-world government, a one-world economy, and a one-world religion, theirs, and has been alluded to by a number of speakers, or specified in some cases by some of the speakers, a population of less than 1 billion. Now, when I make that statement, or some people see some of my videos or whatever on YouTube, they say, where do you get the evidence for that statement? Well, you know what? It's actually in tablets of stone. These are the Georgia Guidestones that mysteriously appeared in 1982. They're about 30 miles outside of Atlanta in Georgia. And on the Guidestones, in 12 modern languages and 12 ancient languages, are the 10 objectives of the New World Order. And I'm not going to take you through them because you can look at this for yourself. Because, one aspect, and I think I speak for all of our speakers, and I know I heard at least one of them say this, don't take anything that you hear here from this platform as the truth. Because we're not here to tell the truth. We're just here to sow seeds. The truth can't be told anyway. The truth has to be realized. It has to be a realization for each individual. So it's, and we never had, knowingly, a better opportunity to check information. And I don't know how much longer we're going to have access to the web in its current format, but let's make use of it while we do. But 3 of those objectives that I'll draw your attention to. Maintain humanity under 500 million in perpetual balance with nature. Now, this is a very interesting phrase, in balance with nature, because you will hear a lot of green groups, a lot of ecology groups, a lot of community groups talking about in balance with nature. A lot of this comes from, and a website I would encourage you to take a look at is the Green Agenda. It's the Green Agenda, which looks at the evolution of the green movement over the last 17 years since the Rio summit in 1992 under the leadership of Maurice Strong. Second objective is guide reproduction wisely, improving fitness and diversity. This is eugenics. There's no other definition. It's eugenics. And number 10 was be not a cancer on the earth, leave room for nature. Leave room for nature. You say, well, really, are they going to do that? Well, let me introduce you to this guy. This is Dr. Eric Pianka, a professor of zoology, and in April 2006, he gave a speech at the University of Texas in Austin. And in that speech, here's a report from the speech. A top scientist gave a speech to the Texas Academy of Science in which he advocated the need to exterminate 90% of the population through the airborne Ebola virus. Dr. Eric Pianka's chilling comments and their enthusiastic reception again underscore the elite's agenda to enact horrifying measures of population control. Pianka's speech was ordered to be kept off the record before it began, but he got a standing ovation. What's interesting for me is all these people that preach eugenics or preach the need for population reduction, they're of course not referring to their family. It's always somebody else. It's a bit like starting wars, isn't it? Funny how in modern wars, those who start the wars, themselves and their families, are never on the front line. Except Prince Harry, but that's a whole other story. Anyway, somebody decided that I did choose some of the more articulate pictures here. But it's amazing how they've survived for nearly 30 years without graffiti on them. But it's an indication that people are starting to become aware here. So we're in the phase of globalization, and everything that we've seen going on recently, and we'll touch on some of this in a second, is about this process of globalization. But let me just show you how this is all happening, because this is how the map of Europe looked after the Second World War. But through a process of gradualism, we have morphed it into this. And while this has been going on, it's also been going on in other parts of the world. Because we have the League of African Nations, we have the Asia-Pacific Economic Community, we have the League of Arab Nations, we have the Southeast Asia Economic Community, and the legislation has been in place now for nearly 3 years. We have the North American Community. And Canada, the US, and Mexico all have the basic legislation in place to establish the North American Union. With a game plan, of course, the first part of that was NAFTA, the North American Free Trade Agreement, and we have GATT as well. It has nothing at all to do with free trade. The next step is to crash the dollar. to dump the dollar, and to introduce the Amero. And the next stage is to merge the North American Union with the European Union and establish the North Atlantic Union. And then embrace the other economic communities all under one umbrella, the United Nations. Now, in theory, and on the surface, this may seem like a pretty good idea. Until, of course, you start to understand that the agenda is driven by the henchman, which is the World Bank. By the way, do you know what the common denominator is of all the countries that are classified as the axis of evil or the axis of terror? No central bank and no debt in any way, shape or form to the World Bank or the IMF. They are completely free and clear. Why do you think that the objective over the last 20 years has been to get individuals into debt? That's the micro scale. This is the macro. And a book I would encourage you to read if you haven't already is The Economic Hitman by a guy called John Perkins. The other henchmen of the World Bank are the World Trade Organization and the World Health Organization, and of course they have absolutely nothing to do with trade and nothing to do with health. In fact, it's, as I think Len said, the complete reverse. And in fact, a lot of people think that the World Health Organization symbol resembles the caduceus, or is the caduceus in some cases. But there is a very, very fundamental difference between the logo of the World Health Organization and the caduceus. And can you see what it is? There's only one serpent. There's only one serpent. We've been talking about this through the week. But a big part of this is the tool that has been created for the last 60 years. I don't have television in my house, thanks to SpongeBob SquarePants. Because I walked upstairs one Saturday morning, and all I could hear coming from the room, turn the mic down, was, "Ah! Ah! Ah!" And there's my 2-year-old son going, I thought, oh, God. So funnily enough, from 3 o'clock that afternoon, the televisions have never worked in our house. And they'll never work again. The kids can watch DVDs. The kids can watch DVDs, but at least we get to control what they watch until they get to about 14 and they go around their friend's house. But it's going on. The TV is the worst offender in terms of controlling our children. And of course, there are moves now to take the children out of the family unit sooner rather than later and break down the family unit. I don't need to tell you that. That's all going on. And then in the schools, and thanks to the food industry, and we'll touch on the creator of this particular problem in a little while, we've now got a crazy situation where the British government is spending in excess of £30 million a year on this pernicious drug called Ritalin. Ritalin is like cocaine. The pharmacologists don't really understand how Ritalin works because it's actually a stimulant. But in the young brain, it has the opposite effect. And a little while ago, there was, about 18 months, 2 years ago now, there was a BBC documentary which was looking at Ritalin. And they had it start off with this kid, about probably 8, 9, bouncing off the walls. Actually, he looked like just a normal child at spin-out time, just before they go to bed. But apparently she did this 24/7. And they came back a few days later after the child had been given a course of Ritalin. And the next shot was of the child sitting at the table, tongue out, drooling. And the interviewer said to the mother, so how does it feel, now that your daughter's taking the Ritalin? And the mother said, well, of course it makes my life a little bit easier, but it's not my daughter. Sure, it's not her daughter. Ritalin is psychoactive. It's completely impacting upon the personality. And the headline here, this was actually an article that appeared in the Daily Mail, the scandal of kiddie coke. Thousands of hyperactive children are being given Ritalin, which can stunt growth or even schizophrenia drugs. Are they victims of greedy drug firms and doctors too quick to diagnose a condition many say doesn't exist? A rhetorical question, because the answer is absolutely yes. A lot of the suicides, there was a cluster of suicides in South Wales, and there have not been any inquiry, but a number of independent scientists have done some research into this. There's been a couple of hypotheses put forward. One is the proximity of phone masts. The other one is that all of the children, the youths involved, were either on Ritalin or something similar, or were coming off. This is a website. Take it down. I'll leave it up long enough for you to take it down. This website is a database of teenage suicide, teenage violent crime, and particular focus on school shootings conducted by youths. Guess what the common denominator is in all these cases? In the US, 10% of all school-aged children are taking Ritalin or an equivalent at any given time. You know, we are screwing here with their heads and with their DNA. And it's the nursery for the adult antidepressants. Now, the vast majority of antidepressants are prescribed to women. And I asked a doctor friend of mine why this was, and he said, well, Ian, he said, that's real easy. He said, because for a guy to go to the doctor, he's got to be basically dead. He said, women have a much more relaxed and comfortable relationship with their GP. And unfortunately, what tends to happen right now is that more and more of the doctors just go, oh, okay, I'm sorry to hear that. Yeah, take some of these. And it's Prozac or some other antidepressant. This is from the Independent. I mean, by the way, this is why I use a lot of newspaper articles in my presentations, is to show you that the public are being told what the problem is, but the guys driving the agenda do this because they fundamentally believe that the population, the masses, are too stupid to latch on to what's going on. And this is almost a control to make sure that actually they don't realize what's occurring. So we put it out there in plain sight. And now, of course, we've got the situation, certainly it's worse in the US than apparently in the UK, but we can actually measure the pharmaceuticals in the water supply, particularly estrogen and the antidepressants. And it's another reason, it's believed to be certainly another reason, why we are seeing effectively Western humanity becoming more feminized. And the fluoride, of course, I think it was Len Horowitz touched on this. I mean, fluoride is a poison. Fluoride was used by the Soviets and the Germans to keep their prison populations dumbed down. There's been an ongoing court case, which will never come to a conclusion, in New Mexico, brought by the relatives of people who have been guests of the state penitentiary, because they go in as one personality and they come out as another. And the hypothesis is that excessive amounts of fluoride are being put into the water to keep the prison population under control. So the case will just be dragged out and dragged out. And the only people who are getting wealthy on the back of that, of course, are the lawyers. Now, vaccinations, I'm not really going to touch on vaccinations. I mean, I think that you've all probably got your own views on that. And, certainly, the key has to be to encourage people to look at what is in the vaccines. Certainly, my younger children have not had any vaccinations and will not have any vaccinations. I traveled all around the world in the oil industry and I never had vaccinations. I used to forge the certificates because I hate needles anyway. So I used to forge the documents to say that I'd had the inoculations when I had to go in those countries where you're supposed to have it. I never got sick. The only time I ever got sick was at a party in Egypt where I drank a bad beer. And if you go to Egypt, there were two types of beer in Egypt. One was Stella, and the other one was Stella Export. And the theory was that Stella Export was made with Nile water that had at least been filtered, and the Stella was just made with the Nile water. Mind you, why they call it export, I've no idea, because I've never found a country yet that imports it. But, this is an observation that was made by Rudolf Steiner way back in 1917. And I think that this is an extremely prescient observation. And in a series of lectures, what Steiner titled The Fall of the Spirits of Darkness, he said the spirits of darkness are going to inspire their human hosts, in whom they will be dwelling, to find a vaccine that will drive all inclination towards spirituality out of people's souls when they are still very young. Children will be vaccinated with a substance which it will certainly be possible to produce, and this will make them immune, so they do not develop foolish inclinations connected with spiritual life. Foolish here, of course, in the eyes of the materialists. Materialism and consumerism is extremely addictive, of course. But nonetheless, there still seems to be this natural evolutionary process that is available to us to step beyond that. And these guys, without any shadow of doubt, want to shut it down. Where's the evidence of that? Read Zbigniew Brzezinski's book that he wrote in 1969 called Between Two Ages, The Technotronic Era. By the way, the report I quoted at the start of this presentation, some people will dismiss it and say, that's just a forgery. Well, let me tell you, if it's a forgery, Zbigniew Brzezinski drew very heavily on it when he wrote the book Between Two Ages, The Technotronic Era. But in that book, he states categorically, it was published in 1970, written in 1969, and he says, the challenge in the future will be to keep people locked into materialistic consumerism so that they do not identify with their true self. Zbigniew Brzezinski, of course, is the mentor to Obama. In Texas, we have the forced vaccinations. This is for cervical cancer. In Texas and in other states in the US, if you decide that your 13-year-old daughter is not going to have the cervical cancer jab, then the child can be forcibly removed from the family and be vaccinated. And this is the way the drug companies work, because this is guaranteed revenue. So this is from the reports of last year, 2 years ago. Merck & Co., the huge drug company, hit the jackpot. Sure, it's spreading nanny government, and surprise, surprise, it's fueled by money. As always, follow the money. But it's more than that. The lives and safety of our children are at stake, no matter what the PR says. Texas Governor Rick Perry signed an executive order on the February 2nd requiring all girls entering 6th grade in Texas to be vaccinated against some of the viruses that cause cervical cancer. And of course, whilst it's not mandatory yet in the UK, we have a situation where it is, of course, being offered to all 13-year-old girls in the British education system. And shortly after that decision was taken, it was established that Paul Blackburn, the senior vice president and financial controller at GlaxoSmithKline, was on the board of Ofsted. And once, of course, it became public knowledge, then he was asked to stand down. But the guy had done the business. The guy could be retired on full salary for the rest of his life because, that singular decision would pay for his salary many, many times over. And you know what? I've got to tell you this. I'm going to choose my words very carefully. But there is something very, very fishy about the Jade Goody affair. I can't put my finger on it yet. But it was August last year on primetime TV, Big Brother in India, when Jade Goody announces to the nation she's got cervical cancer. There is a rush of people to the hospitals and to their doctor to go get a test and go get the jab. And yet, within 7 months or whatever it is, Jade Goody is dying. And I've got to tell you, the only obvious sign was that she had a shaved head. Everything about her behavior and everything else, it just doesn't rest easy with me. I don't know what the outcome of this is, but I don't think we've heard the end of this story somehow. Keep your eyes on the media. So the big pharma revenue stream, everything we're talking about here is the greed of big pharma. This is what Codex Alimentarius is all about. That's why the work of Scott is so important. Because Big Pharma has a very, very unique business model. And that is that every human life form, from conception to death, is a revenue stream. More and more people are starting to latch on to this. But at the moment, only 40% of the population are regular users of pharmaceuticals, which means that they've got 60% to go for. And the fastest way to go for them is to shut down the complementary and alternative health industry. And if there's anybody here from the complementary and alternative health industry that isn't familiar with Codex Alimentarius, then you really need to do some self-education fast, because your livelihood is at stake. And our health is at stake. Now, here's a phenomena that a lot of people don't want to talk about. But I want to encourage you to look up in the skies when these planes are flying over, because something is being deposited in our skies that is not natural. Simon and I had a situation about a year ago. I was actually in the park with my young son early one Sunday morning, beautiful, crisp winter's morning. Simon lived just over the hill on the coast at the time. And I called him and I said, Simon, you got your camera handy? I said, you need to start taking some photographs, please. Let's get a record of what's going on here. Well, we weren't the only ones in the area that actually spotted that. This is what happens. This unnatural layer of trails fan out with the winds, and it creates a sheen that stops the sunlight coming through to the earth. And it lasts certainly all day, and sometimes even onto the next day. Now, there's a gentleman in the audience here that witnessed these trails, and he's seen them on an increasingly regular basis, and he went to Anthony Steen, the local MP. This is the guy, by the way, who said that there's nothing wrong with MPs taking all the money for their expenses, it's just the people, they're just jealous. Oh, did I say that, he said? Sorry, I didn't mean that. But he has to resign, so he's resigning now. But anyway, Anthony Steen looked at the pictures that Christopher, who's out there somewhere, I think, that Christopher took to him, and he said, right, yes, I'm going to ask some questions. And Anthony Steen, on his own initiative, went to the local paper, the Herald Express, and they wrote an article. And this is an extract from that article. It says, Totnes MP Anthony Steen is launching his own investigation into an international conspiracy theory following the fears that South Devon is being poisoned by a toxic cocktail of chemicals being rained down from the skies. Well, we don't know what's in them. Right? I mean, I'm not going to suggest for one moment that I have any idea what's in them. But nonetheless, they're there. Anthony Steen said he plans to put questions to the Secretary of State for Defense. Well, Christopher didn't hear anything for a little while, so he went back to Anthony Steen. And I'll paraphrase. But basically, Christopher said, so Anthony, any information, any joy? And Steen basically said, well, if we were in power, then we might be able to get, but we're not in power. So Christopher said, so you've been fobbed off then? Well, I wouldn't say that, but the issue was dead. I mean, I'm sure he did ask the question, and I'm sure he was just told, you don't go there. But fortunately, there are a few MPs, not least, of course, Norman Baker, who have lived up to the highest standards of public office. But most of these guys, including Anthony Steen, who, of course, we've recently discovered, they're kept in check because of what the House of Commons managers have on these people. Well, if you don't give me an answer, I'm going to have to go to the local press. Well, if you go to the local press, Anthony, I've got an expense report here. It's so easily done. The financial meltdown. Pre-planned. Many, many people saw it coming. Fortunately, one of my presentations a couple of years ago, in July of 2007, was recorded where I actually spelled out what I felt was going to happen. Tragically, I wasn't far off the mark. That was 1 month before the crash of Northern Rock. A few months later, by the way, I'd already got my house on the market at the time of that presentation. And when I put my house on the market, I lived in a big old barn. It was a lovely house. It was 300-year-old barn that the previous owner had converted very nicely. But I didn't really want to be stuck there in the event of the coming financial meltdown, so I put it on the market. That was April 2006 I put it on the market. And when the estate agent came round, he was a big guy. I liked him because he made me look small. But he was an estate agent, so he was a pompous git. But he walked into the house and he said, "Why do you want to sell this beautiful house? It's a lovely house. So why do you want to sell it?" I said, "Because the market's going to crash." He said, "No, that's not going to happen." I said, "Okay." I said, "Obviously, we're not going to tell any potential buyers that, but that's what I believe, and that's why I want to sell the house." Anyway, it took us a while, because it was a bit of a big old house. So it took us a while, and we sold it in October 2007, right at the peak. And the day before, I actually said to my wife, "You know what, I think we might have missed the opportunity." The next day, a buyer came along, so what do you know? But anyway, just before Christmas last year, I ran into this estate agent, and he came up to me, and he said, "Well, you were absolutely right, weren't you? Yeah, you sold your house just in time. So what do you think's going to happen next?" So I told him, and he said, "Oh, don't be stupid. That'll never happen." And here's a little bit of irony. Because, you see here, you remember I opened this presentation with a quote from a report from Iron Mountain. And all the boxes that were being carted out by all these bankers, I think that's how you say it, bankers, yeah, bankers, had Iron Mountain on them. And we haven't seen the last of Iron Mountain in this presentation. There it is again, this Iron Mountain. Somehow I don't think this is as accidental as it might have appeared to the average punter. We've heard about Fort Detrick already with regards to the anthrax. Well, you know, Fort Detrick also has some interesting connotations with some of the other viruses. And in fact, Dr. Linda Horowitz talked about that the other night. But there's another link here that I'm sure many of you are aware of. But if you're not, I just want to make sure you are. It actually has been reported in the press. Again, most things are reported in the press. But it was on like page 27. So very few people see it. But of course, there's a link between aspartame, which is regarded as one of the drivers in problem behavior with young people. In fact, aspartame is actually banned in drinks marketed at under 12s in some states in the US and also in France. But there's a common denominator here, and this is the common denominator. You recognize that guy? Well, that's him as a student, but this is Rumsfeld, of course. Now, one of the interesting factors here, I mean, of course, Rumsfeld was the guy who was CEO of Searle in 1983 when the Food and Drug Administration were refusing to approve aspartame into the US food chain. So Rumsfeld was one of the prime financial contributors to Ronald Reagan's campaign. And the moment that Ronald Reagan was sworn in on the White House lawn, Rumsfeld was on the phone and said, "You need to change the head of the FDA." And by May of that year, aspartame was approved. Now, aspartame is proven to cause holes in the brains of young rats. It's far more pernicious in young people than it apparently is in adults, but probably still better to avoid it completely. And then, of course, Donald Rumsfeld was the chairman of a company called Gilead Sciences when Tamiflu was developed in the late 90s. They didn't know what to do with it, so they actually sold the marketing rights to Roche. But I just want to show you that this guy has been sort of involved. He's been a core figure. Now, I don't believe he's necessarily the architect. He's just the front man here. Now, he's not necessarily the scriptwriter. But, I mean, take a look at this, because Donald Rumsfeld was the architect behind the 1976 flu scam. This was created like Wag the Dog. Anybody seen the film Wag the Dog? Well, President Gerald Ford was really losing in the primaries. I think his counterpart was a guy called George Herbert Walker Bush. But anyway, to try and boost Ford's ratings, they created this swine flu pandemic. And they actually passed legislation that all US citizens were going to be vaccinated. Is that my mum? Tell her I'm busy. I'll call her back. See, he said, okay, we're going to pass legislation that all of American citizens are going to be vaccinated. Actually, they started with the US servicemen. Tragically, a number of servicemen died very quickly after the vaccinations. So, funnily enough, the whole scam was buried. But that was Donald Rumsfeld. Of course, he appears again with aspartame. Searle was purchased by Monsanto. Rumsfeld made about $15 million on that deal alone, because he was CEO, chairman of Gilead Sciences until he was appointed Secretary of State for Defense. He was one of the contributors to the PNAC document that David Halpin talked about, the Project for a New American Century, rebuilding American defenses. Thank you. Quite a senior moment there. On September the 10th, of course, the day before 9/11, he conveniently let slip that the Pentagon couldn't account for $2.3 trillion. That would have come in handy over the last few months, wouldn't it? Of course, it was a good day to bury bad news, but how could he have ever known? Oh, what a stroke of luck. And what was he on 9/11? Oh, yeah, that's still yet to be actually known. He claims to have been in the other side of the Pentagon. Of course, he was the guy who manipulated the war into Afghanistan. He's the guy behind the WMD myth, and was quoted by the media a few years ago in an interview where he said, well, we had to go with WMDs because it was the only thing we could come up with that the public would fall for. It's all out there. Well, he couldn't actually get to the World Bank himself, so he got Paul Wolfowitz, who was his deputy, into the role at World Bank. But, of course, Paul Wolfowitz got run off because he was dipping his pen in the company ink and all that. And then, of course, the latest swine flu. So guess who makes out like a bandit every time there is a flu, whether it's swine flu, bird flu, whatever flu, pandemic? But there's a problem. With all of this, Tamiflu is being bought up by governments all over the world, but there is a problem. But, here we can trace, this is actually the stock price of Gilead Sciences, and we can actually see exactly the moment at which Wall Street caught wind of the possibility of a pandemic because of the outbreak in Mexico. And it happened overnight here between Tuesday and Wednesday, because at 9 a.m., when the market opened on Wall Street, the stock went sky high, jumped by 5% here. Sorry, nearly 10%. But then over the next few days, nothing really happened. But over the weekend, the media picked it up on a global basis. And then on the Monday morning, the stock leaps again. But the effects of Tamiflu, and this is really what we need to be looking at, because Tamiflu is being given out like M&Ms. Smarties here. They've been given out like Smarties at all the schools. There was a school in Torquay where a child was allegedly had Tamiflu, and all the kids were given massive. There was a picture in the local paper of this teacher walking around with big doses of Tamiflu. Another thing happened in Birmingham. But this is from a report. It said the FDA had 12 reports of pediatric deaths in patients taking Tamiflu that had come from Japan. The Food and Drug Administration concluded that it was unable to determine if the deaths were caused by Tamiflu and decided to monitor Tamiflu side effects in the 2006 flu season. During the following year, the FDA continued to receive reports of neuropsychiatric events in patients taking Tamiflu. Many of the additional reports came from Japan, but some also came from the United States. On November the 13th, 2006, the FDA decided to require a Tamiflu warning similar to that already used in Japan. And what was that warning? The warning states that patients taking Tamiflu should be carefully monitored for unusual behavior. Tamiflu is a psychoactive. And I think Len is on the money when he projects that one of the reasons that Tamiflu is being dished out right now is it's seeding something. And come the flu season in this coming autumn, winter, we may see the result of that seeding. Something that you're probably not aware of, but if you're in London, you'll be aware that in recent weeks there's been a trial involving two men who are accused of murdering brutally murdering these two French students in London last year, Gabrielle Ferrez and Laurent Bonhomme. And ironically, I got a copy of the Metro, which is the London paper, London Underground paper, and there was a swine flu article and this trial article on the front page, which I thought was rather ironic. Because what isn't being reported in the media, these are the two alleged perpetrators, the murders, but what isn't reported in the media is that those two student biochemists were working on an analysis of bird flu. And they had proven in their research that the bird flu virus was a construct. It was a genetic construct. 1 week before the murders took place, the laptop of Laurent Bonhomme, was stolen. And a week later, they were brutally murdered. Now, why didn't any of this come out in the court? This was actually reported by George Kadar in the American Free Press last September, before anything was known about the swine flu. By the way, biochemists and microbiologists is an extremely high-risk profession. Go Google suspicious deaths microbiologists or biochemists, including Dr. Kelly, of course. And the shell game. What's going on here with the shell game? The shaming of Parliament. This has been running in the media for 5 weeks now. Do you know what it's hiding? Anytime there is an article or series of articles like this that have got legs, i.e. they'll run and run and run, they're hiding something. Right? I mean, that's a given. Do you know what the link is with Kate Bush and the cocaine and the SAS? No. Well, funnily enough, the media decided to run with the front pages of Kate Bush. Did I say Kate Bush? Sorry, Kate. That is my Frankie moment. It was Kate Moss. That makes it a bit more complex. Sorry, Kate. Oh, my God. Don't sue me. I love your music. I can't sing that high, though. But Kate Moss, the media ran with the photographs of her taking cocaine in a London club on the same day that two members of the SAS were caught in Arab disguises with a car loaded with explosive materials. It was to keep that off the front pages. So what is this keeping off the front pages? Well, let me show you what it's keeping off the front pages. What are we 4 days away from? They say hesitantly. The European elections. These are the most significant European elections ever. And there is no debate in the British media. Why? Because a trump card has been played. This trump card has been building up for 12 years. Because the guy behind the expenses schedule in Parliament was Tony Blair. And by the way, did you notice that Tony Blair's expenses were unfortunately shredded? Tough duty, Tony. This is what it's keeping off the front pages. The fact that 3 countries have voted on various forms of the Treaty of Lisbon. The French and the Dutch in 2005 voting on the EU treaty. And the Irish, of course, the same. Guess who made this statement? Public opinion will be led to adopt, without knowing it, the proposals that we dare not present to them directly. All the earlier proposals will be in the new text, but will be hidden and disguised in some way. What was already difficult to understand will become utterly incomprehensible, but the substance has been retained. The guy tasked with bringing about the Treaty of Lisbon. And of course, Treaty of Lisbon is a consolidation of all the previous treaties. And it is horrendous. Now, there's a gentleman in the audience who I want to draw your attention to here as well, because this guy, again, put his livelihood on the line to try and raise awareness last year of the Treaty of Lisbon. He'd already gone out on a limb regarding 9/11. Now, he did manage to succeed in getting front page coverage in the Irish press and the questions about 9/11, but he raised the questions about the Treaty of Lisbon. He did a number of radio interviews, and he demonstrated in those radio interviews that he had read the document. Jim, where are you? Jim Core, ladies and gentlemen. Jim Core. Better known as the ugly one in the band. Jim, amazing work. Keep it up.
Thank you.
And one day we want you as a speaker. Never before, never before have the British people and many other nations in Europe been dependent on other nations to retain their liberty. Now, I want to show you a clip here because this question, have British government ministers read the Treaty of Lisbon? I want to show you a clip which was put together and put on YouTube. You can see this for yourself by the London-based group We Are Change, where they approached the Miliband's. And let's see what happened there. Can we run the clip, please?
Mr. Miliband, where's our referendum? Angela Merkel says the European Reform Treaty is 99% European constitution. In your manifesto, you said we would have a referendum on this.
We said we'd have a manifesto on a referendum on the constitution, but as Angela
But that's what Angela Merkel said it is.
99%. As Angela Merkel and every other European leader said that the constitution has been abandoned, to quote her.
But it's an affront to our democracy. You're handing away our power, Mr. Miliband. You're handing away our power, the people's power. You're giving it to the corporations.
That's your view, but it's not mine.
But Angela Merkel says the new treaty is 99% the same as the constitution.
It's exactly the same, Mr. Miliband. There's only 10 differences in that treaty. Only 10. You're giving away our power. We voted you, and you're giving our power away. Miliband, do you not feel you might be wasting your time a bit in writing a manifesto when you don't stick to your last one with regards to the EU referendum?
No, we're definitely going to stick to our manifesto. We always do.
Well, how come you're not having a referendum? Why is this European Reform Treaty?
And we've stuck to it on European reform, on the European Reform Treaty as well.
It's not going through this week. It's a three-line whip. There's no referendum.
Nice to see you.
You're giving away our power, Mr. Miliband. You're giving away the people's power. They gave.
I don't agree with that. Actually.
You are though.
I don't agree with that.
The Parliament may as well just be like a mayor's office.
Well, that's not the way I see it. But
well, how do you see it?
Well, I think Parliament plays a very important role. In fact, it's starting to debate the EU Reform Treaty on Monday, and there'll be a vigorous debate.
Well, it won't be a vigorous debate. It's a three-line whip.
But I suggest you try and attend the debate, and there'll be a very vigorous debate in Parliament.
It's a three-line whip, so the MPs have got no choice but to vote through.
I find amongst my colleagues that they understand the need
for
the
democracy that you're giving away.
No, I don't think we are giving away democracy.
It is. The laws are going to be written in Europe.
No,
by people like Peter Mandelson, who Tony Blair's appointed the royal prerogative, who's writing the trade laws for Europe.
I think you're listening to people who
No, I'm not. I'm listening to Tony Benn telling me this.
Well, I don't agree with
This is Tony Benn.
I've got great respect for Tony Benn. I don't agree with him on this issue.
This isn't a nationalistic issue at all. I'm not a nationalist at all. This is an issue of democracy, and you are giving away the people's democracy. You have no right to give away our democracy.
I don't
Absolutely no right to be doing this.
I don't see it that way.
Well, you should look at it this way.
No, I don't see it that way. I mean, the EU Reform Treaty is about putting into practice enlargement of the EU, which I think is the right thing.
So have you actually read the treaty? Have you read this reform treaty?
Actually, you find that lots and lots of people support the EU Reform Treaty. Look, I'm going to have to go and say hello to other
thanks
people.
for your time anyway.
Thank you
I
very much.
Have you actually read it? Can you tell me if you've read it all? Can you tell me if you've read the Reform Treaty?
I know lots about the Reform Treaty.
So you've not read it? You've not read it?
Now we have a new constitutional treaty.
Can we cut?
Thanks.
Thank you. So what do you think? Has he read it? Of course not. So this is the minister, for Europe. He hasn't read the treaty.
Not a man, just a boy.
He's a boy, exactly. I mean, these guys are not statesmen. I mean, Miliband has pretenses, to succeed Gordon Brown. I mean, God forbid, the guy hasn't even finished his paper round. Yeah. But, Tony Blair was very astute. I mean, we know, obviously he was a prime actor. But he was never going to sign away the Treaty of Lisbon. He was extremely grateful when there was the no votes. He was able to get out of office. But Gordon Brown was clearly told, you have to sign this. That is your job. You have to sign it. Now, he's done what he was required. Now he's expendable. Now he's going to be run off. He was never, ever going to be elected as Prime Minister. Princess Dave has been groomed all the way along. Princess Dave is actually, believe it or not, he's a smarter guy than Obama. Next time you watch Obama give a speech, okay, he's at the podium, and I can literally mimic Obama giving a speech. And that's not practicing for Wimbledon. Obama is literally reading the teleprompts. And there's a clip on YouTube where the teleprompt gets messed up, and he has no clue. No clue. He has no idea what he's going to say. And I actually think, that if you asked Obama what he was going to say 5 minutes before he went on the platform, or asked him what he'd said 5 minutes after he came off, he wouldn't have a clue. The guy is the actor fulfilling the role. He is not the decision maker. It was Bill Hicks. I'm sure some of you heard me tell this story before. But Bill Hicks, used to say that he had this vision that every time a new president was sworn in on the White House lawn, he was immediately whisked off down into the basement of the White House, and he was shown the real film of what happened at Dealey Plaza in 1963. And they let it sink in and then said, "Now, Mr. President, any questions?" Well, Gordon obviously wanted to be Prime Minister, and he did exactly what he was told to do. But these guys, in Ireland, are literally right now, basically the only line of defense we have between the literal end of any national self-determination. Now, I'm not anti-Europe, per se. Thank you. I'm not anti-Europe, but I'm certainly anti-Treaty of Lisbon in a big way. And these guys, Libertas, Declan Ganley is not anti-European. In fact, Libertas is intended to be a European-wide party. But he understands the magnitude of the Treaty of Lisbon. Let me tell you, the vast majority of people have no clue what's going on here. Because the EU is not a democracy in any way, shape, or form. When you elect your member of European Parliament, it's like electing your trade union representative in your company. The MEP has zero influence in legislation in Europe. Zero. They can offer comment, observation, but ultimately they cannot really influence. Hang on, I have to take questions another time. These two guys, there's another two guys who are between us and the end of sovereignty. One is Lech Kaczynski in Poland, because he's refused to sign the treaty, calling it pointless. But his counterpart in the Czech Republic, Václav Klaus, the two houses in the Czech Republic have both signed off the Treaty of Lisbon. The moment this guy is out of office, the Treaty of Lisbon will be ratified in the Czech Republic. That will put the pressure on the Poles, so all we're left with is Ireland. And in October of this year, they go to the polls again. And obviously, we hope they get the wrong answer, or some of us hope they get the wrong answer again. But phenomenal pressure is being put on Ireland. Immediately after the vote last year, all the funding was pulled from Ireland. Their unemployment is rising dramatically. All the major infrastructure projects have been shut down. This is how they get the control. And you know who the first EU president is going to be, don't you? You know who's been promised that role? Yes, none other than Tony. Outrageous. I just love that slide that somebody showed during the weekend. The Tony Blair Faith Foundation. Give me a break. You know, they were going to set that up in the London School of Economics, and they said, forget it, you're not going to be taken seriously. So he had to go over to the US and set it up. But I had this vision of Tony Blair, and I hope to see it like this in my lifetime, I tell you. This was my absolute definitive that he was in line for the EU presidency. The EU is a Catholic entity. He could not become president of the EU as a Protestant. He had to go through this conversion to Catholicism. That's the final straw, basically. This is taken from a website I do encourage you to look at. It's from the Irish group that have a have a table out in the hallway down there, wethepeople.ie. Please look at it. Because there's more truth on that website than you will see on any other EU website. There you go, there's Tony in his new role. And I'm not even going to get into the barcoding and the microchipping, but that's coming. That's exactly what this is all about. It is about the total control, and Zbigniew Brzezinski wrote about it in the book Between Two Ages. I would absolutely encourage you, if there's one book that you get, you can't buy it here, it's tough to get hold of. You can buy it from second-hand online bookstores. Unfortunately, it does tend to go for rather large sums of money. But it is the script of everything that we see occurring right now. Now, I'm going to close with another quote from Iron Mountain. The last best hope for peace. Because remember, that was what the report was all about. That was what the right-wing think tank was tasked with coming up with. The alternatives to traditional war. And it's linked, in my opinion, very much to the London Olympics. And it's what I've determined as Project Zion. Now, what I'm going to tell you next, I wouldn't perhaps feel quite so confident about making these statements were it not for an incident in Chicago in 2006. I was giving a talk at a conference in Chicago in 2006, and ostensibly the conference was to look at the veracity of the official version of events of 9/11. And some months before that, I had thought, these guys who do this stuff, they are not going to be able to pass up on the opportunity of doing something on the 6th of June 2006. 666. So I thought, okay, I wonder where the zip code in the US of 60666 is. Well, I Googled that, and it's Sears Tower in Chicago. And then I discovered that Larry Silverstein had just taken over the contract for Sears Tower a few months before. I thought, oh my God. But then I thought, okay, maybe I'm, jumping on the wrong bandwagon here. Let's look at another few options. So I looked at 60606, that's Chicago O'Hare Airport. And I thought, well, they get a bit cute sometimes, so let's look at 60018, 3 times 6. And that was the hotel where I was giving the presentation. So I gave this presentation. You can find this presentation on YouTube, by the way. It's in a couple of places on YouTube. And so I'm giving this presentation. I'm showing, how I've come to this conclusion. And then I sort of pulled out my air ticket and I said, fortunately, I'm out of here on the 5th. Nothing happened. So, during the course of the presentation, there were a number of people in the room who had blogs, who had radio shows. Alex Jones was sitting down there on the front. And I said, guys, I don't know that something is definitely going to happen, but it's possible. So put it out there. Get it out there on your blogs. The worst I can do is cry wolf. Well, nothing happened. 2 weeks later, an article appeared in the press that a terror cell had been arrested in Florida with detailed plans of Sears Tower. The trial of those individuals took place in the last few weeks. Did we stop something? I don't know. But it's that which gives me the confidence to actually present what I'm going to tell you now, because Project Zion possibly comes from something that is also written in the final chapters of the report from Iron Mountain, where it says, it has been hotly argued that a believable external menace would offer the last best hope of peace by uniting mankind against the danger of destruction by creatures from other planets or from outer space. But look at this. It is probable, in our judgment, that such a threat will have to be invented. No shit. Well, we could debate that one all night. But there it is. And many of you will remember that Reagan, through the late 80s, made many, many speeches, and particularly a very famous one in the UN, where he said, I often wonder, if mankind would forget all its differences if we were faced with some external threat, like an alien invasion. Well, these guys have an agenda. They want to establish global control sooner rather than later. This is an advert that was in London very recently. And if any of you have seen the video that was produced for the London Olympics, it has all these UFOs flying around it. You can find that on YouTube. So I don't know that something is going to happen. But let's treat this like another Chicago. The more we put it out there, and you can blame it on me, but the less likelihood is they can do anything with it. But they have every intention, one way or another, in my opinion, of using the London Olympics as a catalyst to establish some kind of global shutdown. It also, of course, coincides with the forecasted major solar activity, exactly that time, which could, of course, as has been alluded to earlier, shut down all of the electromagnetic grids across the planet. So we have to prepare ourselves, that something significant could be about to happen. But let's take a bit of comfort from George Bush's observation. This he made at a speech in March of 2001. He said, "You can fool some of the people all the time, and those are the ones you concentrate on." I think he's telling us what it's all about. Now you heard from Helen about 2012, and 2012 has only been in the mass consciousness for 22 years. We can actually trace it back to the publication of Jose Arguelles' book, The Mayan Factor. And a lot of people have started to establish an existential commitment and conviction to a particular outcome of 2012. For a lot of people, come the 22nd of December, they might just keel over and die because the expectation was so great and nothing happened. But we've got to actually, I think, we've got a tremendous opportunity here, because there's no doubt in my mind, and I know from talking to many of you through the weekend, there's no doubt in many of yours, that we are at a very, very significant juncture in our evolutionary process. But it's an opportunity. Just like for an individual, when they get to about the age of 40, they have this opportunity. It's dumbed down in the West as the midlife crisis. But in the indigenous peoples, it's regarded as the midlife opportunity. Well, we have an opportunity here. And that opportunity actually is enhanced, I believe, just the same as it is on the micro basis, on a personal basis, by education, by educating ourselves. And I think that, here we are at the proverbial 5 minutes to midnight, and we really do have a tremendous opportunity. But it has to start from within. There's been some great presentations about what we can do through the weekend. And, there's a lot of excellent counsel there. But I think that, actually we've got to start from ourselves. And I think what's going to happen is something is going to be organic. I mean, here we are with some, 400 people or whatever, an event like this, which is indicative of what's occurring in terms of the awareness and the awakening that's going on. Because a few years ago, it would have been unthinkable that we could have attracted this number of people to an event like this. And I'd love to think that by the time we get to AV4, AV5, we're in a place that's twice the size of this. And who knows, by 2012, we could be in the CO2 arena. So let me just bring to an end. I mean, what has been the most amazing part of this conference for me has been the opportunity to share a few moments with so many of you over the weekend. And I hope that, whilst obviously the speakers have been the catalyst and hopefully they've sown some ideas and, given you some impetus to do some research of your own, but I hope that what you take away from this most of all is the realization that there are so many people who share love and compassion and a desire for humanity to reach its full potential. Individually, we can't do that, just like there's no way individually any one of us could have put something like this on. But collectively, it's amazing what we can achieve, and I believe that opportunity is right in front of us. Thank you very much.
Thank you.